The metal airlock groaned open and 6-year-old Katie felt hands grab her shoulders from behind. Before she could turn around, someone shoved her hard through the opening. Her knees hit the burning sand outside, and tiny crystals cut into her skin like broken glass. She cried out in pain and surprise. Behind her, the heavy door of Colony Station Theta 7 slammed shut. The sound was so final, so permanent, that Katie's heart seemed to stop beating for a second. "Wait. Please let me back in." She scrambled to her feet and pounded her small fists against the hot metal door. "I didn't break anything. I promise I didn't." Nobody answered. Through the thick window in the door, she could see Administrator Reynolds turning his back on her. His face looked hard and cold, like he'd turned to stone. The other adults standing behind him looked away. Some of them looked ashamed, but nobody moved to help her. Nobody spoke up for her. Katie pressed her face against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please? My mom and dad would never let you do this. They'd tell you I'm a good girl." But her mom and dad were dead. They died 3 months ago when the colony's life support system failed for the first time. Poison gas had flooded their sector while they slept. Katie had been spending the night in the children's wing, and that's the only reason she survived. Since then, she'd lived in the orphan quarters with the other kids who'd lost their parents. The life support kept breaking down after that first time. Every few weeks, something else would malfunction. The water recyclers, the oxygen generators, the temperature controls. People were scared. They were angry. And most of all, they needed someone to blame. 2 days ago, the systems failed again, this time near the orphan quarters. Some of the adults decided that Katie must have tampered with something. After all, both failures had happened near where she was. Never mind that she was 6 years old and barely tall enough to reach the control panels. Never mind that she'd been asleep when it happened. The adults needed answers, and a little orphan girl couldn't defend herself. So here she was, thrown out into the wasteland to die. Katie finally stopped pounding on the door. Her hands hurt, and she knew nobody was coming. She turned around and looked at what was now her whole world. The scorched barren stretched out forever in every direction. The sand wasn't normal sand like from beaches in the picture books. It was made of tiny crystals that sparkled in the sunlight, pretty but sharp enough to cut skin. Here and there, massive stone structures stuck up out of the dunes like the bones of dead giants. The ruins were smooth and weathered, covered in strange symbols that nobody could read. They'd been there for thousands of years, built by aliens who'd lived and died long before humans ever came to this planet. The sun beat down on Katie's head. Her thin colony jumpsuit, meant for temperature-controlled hallways, did almost nothing to protect her. She looked down and saw a small metal canister lying in the sand near her feet. Someone had thrown it out with her. She picked it up and shook it. Water sloshed inside, but not much. Maybe enough for one day if she was really careful. Katie remembered the survival lessons all colonists had to take. Find shade during the hottest part of the day. Don't waste water. Watch out for sand serpents when the sun goes down. But those lessons were meant for adults going on short trips outside, not for little kids who'd been abandoned. She picked a direction and started walking. There was a big ruin on the horizon, bigger than the others, and Katie thought maybe she could hide in its shadow when the sun got too hot. Her feet sank into the crystal sand with every step. The sharp grains worked their way into her shoes and cut her ankles. It hurt, but she kept walking because she didn't know what else to do. Time seemed to move strangely in the desert. Katie felt like she'd been walking forever, but the big ruin didn't look any closer. The sun climbed higher and higher until the whole world felt like an oven. Her lips dried out and cracked. When she licked them, she tasted blood. She took tiny sips from her water canister, but it got lighter and lighter in her hands. Katie thought about her mom tucking her into bed at night. She thought about her dad making funny faces to make her laugh. They'd always promised they'd keep her safe. They'd promised nothing bad would ever happen to her. But they died and left her alone, and now the whole colony had thrown her away like garbage. The sun finally started going down. Katie thought this would make things better, but instead it got worse. The temperature dropped so fast that her sweat-soaked clothes turned icy cold against her skin. She started shivering so hard her teeth chattered and bit her tongue. She stumbled toward a crumbling stone archway, part of one of the ancient ruins. The stones were covered in symbols and pictures she couldn't understand. Katie crawled underneath the arch and curled up into a tiny ball, trying to keep warm. The twin moons rose into the sky, turning everything silver and strange. Then she heard the howling. It wasn't wind. It was something alive. Something hunting. The howls echoed across the dunes, sometimes far away, sometimes closer. Katie pressed herself against the cold stone and tried to make herself as small as possible. She was shaking so hard now that she could barely breathe. This was it, she realized. This was how she was going to die. Frozen and alone in the desert, just like her parents had died alone when the poison gas filled their room. Nobody would even know what happened to her. Nobody would care. Her eyes started to close. She was so cold that she stopped feeling cold, which some deep part of her brain knew was a very bad sign. The stars above her started spinning, and the moons seemed to multiply. Katie's eyes drifted shut. Somewhere in that fuzzy space between being awake and being asleep, something huge passed overhead. It blocked out the moons completely, casting a shadow so big it covered the whole archway. The sand around Katie's body suddenly felt warm, like someone had turned on a heater. The last thing Katie noticed before everything went dark was a sound. Something enormous was landing on the ground right next to her. And then she saw them. Scales, each one as big as her hand, colored deep red and shining gold in the moonlight. They were the most beautiful things she'd ever seen. Then the darkness took her and Katie knew nothing more. Off in the distance, the howling creatures that had been moving closer suddenly stopped. They caught a scent on the wind, something ancient and powerful and dangerous. Their hunting instincts, sharp from millions of years of evolution, screamed at them to run. And so they did, disappearing back into the dunes as fast as their legs could carry them. They knew, even if they couldn't understand it, that something far more dangerous than them now guarded the small human child sleeping under the stone archway. Katie woke up warm, which was so strange that for a moment she thought she was back in her bed at the colony. But then she opened her eyes and saw red. Deep, beautiful red that seemed to glow in the morning light. It took her sleepy brain a few seconds to understand what she was looking at. She was staring at the underside of a wing. A massive wing covered in scales, each one perfectly fitted to the next like armor. The wing was so big it could have covered her entire orphan dormitory back at the colony. Katie's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head to see what the wing was attached to. The creature lying next to her was impossible. Its body stretched longer than a transport truck, covered entirely in scales that shifted between crimson red and burnished gold depending on how the light hit them. 4 legs ended in claws that looked sharp enough to slice through metal. A thick neck led up to a head that was both terrifying and magnificent at the same time. Horns curved back from its skull like a crown, and its eyes glowed with a soft golden light, watching her. Those eyes held intelligence. Real, thinking intelligence that made Katie's stomach flip. "You're awake, little one." The voice didn't come from the creature's mouth. Instead, it appeared directly inside Katie's head, gentle but powerful, like distant thunder rolling across mountains. Katie screamed and scrambled backward so fast she fell over her own feet. The creature didn't move. It just kept watching her with those glowing eyes. "Peace, child. I will not harm you." The voice in her head was calmer now, almost soothing. "My name is Varanther. What do they call you?" Katie's mouth opened and closed a few times before any sound came out. "Katie," she finally whispered. Then louder, "Katie Reynolds." "Why are you alone in the killing sands, Katie Reynolds? Human hatchlings do not survive here." The question made all the fear and sadness come rushing back. Katie's eyes filled with tears, and soon she was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Between hiccups and gasps she told Varanther everything. About her parents dying. About the adults blaming her for things she didn't do. About being pushed through the airlock to die in the desert. Varanther listened without interrupting. His massive head tilted slightly to one side as she talked, and something in his glowing eyes softened. When Katie finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke again, and his mental voice was heavy with old pain. "I understand abandonment, Katie Reynolds. I am the last of my kind. The last of the flame drakes. The last." Katie wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "What happened to the others?" "The Krell Empire hunted us. They wanted what we carry inside us, something called a fire heart. It is an organ that burns like a star and gives us our power. The Krell killed thousands of my people to take those hearts and use them to power their machines and weapons. I fled here, to this forgotten place, and I have been alone for 300 years. Katie stared at him, trying to imagine being alone for that long. 300 years was longer than her great-great-great-grandparents had been alive. "That's so sad," she said quietly. "Yes." Varanther lowered his enormous head until one of his eyes was level with her face. The eye was bigger than her whole head. "But perhaps the universe has a strange sense of humor. You needed shelter and protection. And I find that I am tired of being alone. Would you like to stay with me, Katie Reynolds?" Before Katie could answer, Varanther gently picked her up with one clawed hand. His movements were so careful, like he was holding something incredibly precious and fragile. Then he spread his wings and launched into the air. Katy gasped as the ground fell away beneath them. The morning sun caught Varanthar's scales and sent rainbow colors dancing across the sand below. They flew toward a mountain of rock that Katy hadn't noticed before, and Varanthar dove straight at what looked like solid stone. At the last second, an opening appeared, hidden by shadows and clever angles. They flew right through it. Inside, Katy's jaw dropped. The cave opened up into chambers so big they could have fit the entire colony station inside. Ancient technology lined the walls, panels glowing with soft blue light. Water dripped from cracks in the ceiling, feeding clear pools that reflected strange crystals growing from the rocks. The crystals gave off their own light, making everything look magical. Katy saw alcoves filled with strange objects, sleeping areas carved from stone, and at the center of it all, a massive nest made of woven metal and fabric that Varanthar must have collected over centuries. The precursors built this place long ago, Varanthar explained, setting Katy down gently near one of the water pools. They were a peaceful people who lived on this world thousands of years before humans or Krell ever came here. The Krell destroyed them just like they destroyed my kind. But their technology still works, providing water and light. It will provide shelter for you too. Katy knelt by the pool and drank. The water was cool and clean and tasted better than anything she'd ever had at the colony. She drank until her stomach felt full, then splashed some on her face and cut ankles. "You're really not going to eat me?" Katy asked. She knew it was a silly question, but she had to be sure. A sound like rocks grinding together came from Varanthar's chest. It took Katy a moment to realize he was laughing. "I eat large desert creatures, child. You would not even be a snack." His tone became gentler. "No, Katy Reynolds. You are safe here. I give you my word, and a dragon's word is an oath that cannot be broken." Katy looked around the cave at the glowing crystals, the ancient technology, and the impossible creature who had saved her life. She had nowhere else to go. The colony didn't want her. But somehow this dragon felt safer than any of the humans who'd thrown her away. "Okay," she said simply. "Thank you, Varanthar. You are welcome, little one. Now rest. You are exhausted and you have injuries that need time to heal. When you wake, we will discuss how you will survive in this place." Varanthar used his tail to gather soft fabric from his nest, making a bed for Katy near one of the warm pools. As she curled up on the makeshift bed, his tail curved around her like a protective barrier, radiating gentle heat. For the first time since her parents died, Katy felt safe. She felt protected. Outside, the desert was deadly and full of dangers. But here, in a dragon's lair hidden in ancient ruins, an abandoned little girl had found something she thought was lost forever. She'd found hope. And maybe, just maybe, she'd found family. As Katy drifted off to sleep, Varanthar watched over her with ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had expected to die alone, the last of his kind, with no one to mourn him. But this small, fragile human child had changed something. For the first time in 3 centuries, he had a reason to keep living. He had someone to protect. And Varanthar took his responsibilities very, very seriously. 3 weeks had passed since Varanthar found Katy in the desert, and she'd learned that dragons were very serious teachers. Every morning, before the sun even came up, Varanthar would gently nudge her awake with his massive snout. "Up, little one. The desert is coolest now. This is when we learn." Katy would groan and rub her eyes, but she always got up. She'd learned quickly that Varanthar didn't accept excuses, but he also never asked her to do anything impossible. This particular morning, they stood near a cluster of stubby plants growing between 2 rocks. The plants were ugly, covered in needles that looked mean and sharp. "Tell me about the crystal cactus," Varanthar said, using one enormous claw to point at the plant. Katy walked around it slowly, remembering everything he'd taught her. "The needles always point toward underground water. See, these ones point that way, so there's probably a spring somewhere in that direction." She knelt down carefully, avoiding the needles. "The inside holds water, but you can't just bite into it. The outer layer is poison. You have to peel it away first like this." She used a sharp rock to carefully cut away the toxic outer flesh, revealing the moist interior. "And the flowers only bloom at night, which means something pollinates them in the dark. Probably night crawlers. So if I need protein, I can set traps near blooming cactus after sunset." "Good," Varanthar rumbled, and Katy felt a warm glow of pride. The dragon didn't give compliments often, which made them extra special when they came. "You learn fast for such a small creature." Katy had definitely changed in 3 weeks. She'd grown at least an inch, her body responding to regular meals of roasted meat and desert vegetables that Varanthar gathered. Her skin had turned brown from the sun, and tough calluses covered her feet. The cuts on her ankles had healed into thin white lines. She was still small, still just 6 years old, but she was stronger now. Tougher. Varanther taught her to read the sand like a book. Disturbed grains here meant tunnels underneath where serpents lived. A certain pattern there showed where a sandrunner had passed during the night. Smooth, untouched sand was often a trap, hiding sinkholes that could swallow a person whole. He showed her which ruins offered the best shelter during sandstorms, and how to navigate by the stars when both moons were dark. He taught her to listen to the desert sounds, understanding the difference between wind and predators, between settling rocks and approaching danger. Katie soaked up every lesson like a sponge. She had to. Deep down, she understood that Varanther wouldn't live forever, even if 300 years seemed impossible to her young mind. If something happened to him, she'd need to survive on her own. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a high ledge, Katie asked the question that had been bothering her. Why do you teach me all this stuff? You could just keep me in the cave where it's safe. Varanther was quiet for so long that Katie thought maybe he hadn't heard her. Then he spoke, his mental voice heavy with emotion. Because the universe is cruel to those who cannot defend themselves. I failed to protect my own kind from the hunters. I will not fail you, Katie Reynolds. If something happens to me, you must be able to survive alone. Nothing's gonna happen to you, Katie said fiercely. You're the strongest thing in the whole desert. Maybe the whole planet. Even the strong fall eventually, little one. But I am grateful that you have faith in me. As the days passed, something neither of them expected began to happen. They weren't just teacher and student anymore. They were becoming friends. Real friends. Varanther found himself looking forward to Katie's endless questions. She wanted to know everything about the worlds he'd seen before hiding in the desert. What did the crystal cities look like? How hot was a plasma storm? What did alien music sound like? She listened to his stories with her eyes wide, hanging on every word. In return, Katie told him about human things. She explained birthday parties and ice cream, even though Varanther couldn't quite understand why humans celebrated getting older by eating frozen sweetness. She taught him games like I Spy, which was hilarious because Varanther could spot things miles away with his sharp dragon eyes. She told him the bedtime stories her parents used to tell her, and sometimes her voice would crack with sadness, but Varanther never interrupted. One afternoon, Katie discovered a new chamber deep in the cave system. When she stepped inside, the walls lit up with images of stars and planets, all glowing in beautiful colors. Varanther squeezed through the passage behind her, barely fitting. This is the archive chamber, he explained. The precursors built it to store their knowledge. I have never been able to make it work properly. The technology does not respond to my touch. Katie reached out and touched a glowing panel. Immediately, the whole room blazed with light. Symbols scrolled across translucent screens, and a holographic figure appeared in the center of the room. It was tall and elegant, with 4 arms and skin that seemed to shimmer like oil on water. The figure spoke in a language Katie didn't understand, but somehow the meaning appeared in her mind anyway. Welcome, Inheritor. The archives await your command. Varanther's eyes widened in shock. Impossible. Only those with precursor blood should be able to activate this technology. He stared at Katie with new wonder. Perhaps humans are not as young a species as we believed. Perhaps you carry their genetic memory buried deep inside you. Katie spent hours exploring the archive while Varanther watched in fascination. She found star charts showing thousands of worlds, historical records of civilizations long dead, and technical documents about machines she couldn't begin to understand. But she also found something else. Records of the Krell Empire. Maps showing their territory spreading across the galaxy like a disease. They're still out there, Katie said quietly, looking at a map that showed Krell space taking up huge chunks of the galaxy. The ones who hurt your people. Yes. They believe my kind is extinct. I intend to keep it that way. That evening, Katie noticed Varanther moving strangely, favoring his left side. When she asked about it, he said it was nothing. But Katie had learned to read the dragon's moods, and she could tell he was in pain. She pestered him with questions until he finally gave in. He showed her an old wound across his chest, a scar that had never properly healed. It was where Krell hunters had nearly ripped out his fireheart 200 years ago. The scar tissue was thick and discolored, and when Katie touched it gently, she could feel heat radiating from it like an infection that never quite went away. It hurts you, she said. It wasn't a question. It is an old pain. I am used to it. But Katie wouldn't accept that. She'd been watching how Varanther took care of himself, which desert herbs he ate when he felt sick, how he cleaned his scales. She gathered supplies and heated water in a metal bowl using a small burst of Varanthar's flame. Then, with the dragon watching in puzzlement, she began to wash the old scar with warm water and crushed healing herbs. Her hands looked impossibly tiny against his vast chest, but she worked carefully and gently. She spent over an hour cleaning away centuries of accumulated damage, applying poultices made from plants she'd learned to identify. Varanthar sat perfectly still, barely breathing. "Why do you do this?" he asked softly. Katie looked up at him, her young face serious beyond her years. "Because you take care of me. So I take care of you. That's what families do, right?" Something shifted in Varanthar's ancient heart. This small human child, barely more than a baby by dragon standards, saw him not as a monster or a useful tool, but as someone worthy of gentleness and care. She'd given him something he thought he'd lost forever when the last of his kind died. She'd given him family. "Yes," he rumbled quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "That is exactly what families do." The Krell warship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the star system, its sensors immediately scanning the desert planet below. In the command chair sat Commander Vex, a man who'd stopped being fully human decades ago. The Krell had replaced half his body with their biotechnology as payment for his hunting services. Now he was more machine than man, his face covered in metal plating, one eye replaced with a red mechanical scanner that never blinked. He was the best hunter in Krell space. He tracked down and killed creatures on 100 worlds. Species that were supposed to be extinct. Beings that were supposed to be myths. Something rare existed. Vex found it and took it. "Sir, we've got something," his scanner officer called out. "Precursor technology activating in the southern hemisphere. And there's another signature. It's faint, but it matches our database for a Drake Fireheart." Vex leaned forward, his mechanical eye whirring as it focused on the data streaming across his screen. "That's impossible. The Drakes are dead. I helped kill the last breeding colony myself on Dravis Prime 15 years ago. The signature is unmistakable, sir. Old, but definitely a Fireheart." A twisted smile spread across the human half of Vex's face. "Then we've just found the biggest payday in the sector. A Drake Fireheart powers the Krell's newest dreadnought for 50 years. The Council will pay a fortune." He stood up. "Prepare a strike team. Full containment gear. I want that heart intact and still beating." High on a cliff overlooking the ancient ruins, Katie sat with her legs dangling over the edge. She was using a viewing scope that Varanthar had made for her from salvaged precursor technology, watching for the desert rabbits they called sandrunners. Movement in the sky caught her attention. Not a bird. Something metallic, glinting in the sunlight. Her heart stopped. Varanthar. She reached out through the mental connection they developed over the past months. "Ship. There's a ship coming. Multiple heat signatures." His response came instantly urgent. "Return to the lair. Now." Katie was already moving, her feet finding the fastest path down the cliff face. 3 weeks of training had made her quick and sure-footed. She burst into the cave system to find Varanthar gathering their most important belongings, his movements controlled but fast. "They're Krell," he said, his mental voice grim. "I can smell their ship's exhaust from here. We need to hide deeper in the caves where the rock will block my heat signature." "How did they find you?" Katie's voice shook. "The archives. When you activated them, we must have sent out some kind of signal. This is not your fault, little one. They would have found me eventually. The Krell are nothing if not persistent." They retreated deeper into the cave system, into passages so narrow that Varanthar had to squeeze through sideways. But minutes later they heard boots echoing off stone walls. The hunters had thermal scanners, equipment designed to track body heat through solid rock. Katie and Varanthar emerged from a side tunnel to find themselves trapped in the main cavern. 12 hunters in black armor formed a circle around them, weapons raised. The weapons hummed with deadly energy, designed specifically to bring down large creatures. Commander Vex stepped forward and Katie felt sick looking at him. He was wrong somehow, like someone had taken a person and broken them and put them back together all wrong. "Magnificent," Vex breathed, staring at Varanthar. "I thought I'd killed the last of your kind on Dravis Prime, but here you are. Do you have any idea how much the Krell Council will pay for your Fireheart?" "Enough to buy a small moon." "You will not take it," Varanthar growled, and the sound made rocks fall from the ceiling. Katie pressed against his side, terrified but refusing to hide. Vex noticed her for the first time. His mechanical eye focused on her with a whir and click. "A human child? Out here in the wasteland?" He checked a device on his wrist. "The exile from Colony Theta 7. This is rich. A condemned child and an extinct dragon playing house in ancient ruins. He raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Katie. The child complicates things. Better to eliminate her first. No. Varanther moved faster than something his size should be able to move, but the hunters were ready. They fired energy nets from launchers, nets specifically designed to contain drakes. The charged filaments wrapped around Varanther's legs and wings, electricity coursing through them. Varanther roared in agony, a sound so terrible that Katie clapped her hands over her ears. His flames flickered weakly as the nets drained his energy. Katie screamed his name and ran forward, trying to pull at the nets with her bare hands. They shocked her backward and she hit the ground hard, the air knocked from her lungs. The hunters moved in with a massive drill device mounted on a floating platform. It was designed to pierce dragon scales and extract the fire heart while the creature was still alive. The organ only worked if it was taken fresh, still beating. Vex positioned the drill over Varanther's chest, right over the old scar that Katie had so carefully tended. "This will hurt," he said casually, like he was discussing the weather. "But you'll be conscious until the very end. Krell Medical Science has perfected the extraction process." Katie looked at Varanther, trapped and helpless in the crackling nets. She looked at the drill aimed at his heart. This dragon had saved her life. He'd taught her to survive. He'd given her a home when everyone else threw her away. He was her family. The only family she had left. And Katie made a decision. She didn't think about it. Thinking would have made her too scared to move. She just acted the way Varanther had taught her to act when sand serpents attacked. Fast, decisive, committed. As Vex activated the drill, Katie threw herself between the weapon and the dragon. The drill was designed to punch through scales that could withstand plasma fire. It went through Katie's small body like a spear through paper. She gasped, more from surprise than pain at first. Then the pain came, white-hot and overwhelming. Blood bloomed across her shirt and her legs gave out. Time seemed to stop. Varanther stared at Katie crumpled on the ground, her blood pooling on the ancient stone floor. Something inside him, something buried under 3 centuries of survival instinct and self-preservation, shattered completely. His fire heart, old and weakened, suddenly blazed with fury that hadn't burned since his species ruled the skies. The energy nets began to glow red, then white, then they simply melted away like morning frost under a sun. Varanther's roar shook the entire mountain. When he opened his jaws, the flames that poured out weren't the normal red-orange Katie had seen him use for cooking. These flames were blue-white, the color of stars being born, hot enough to turn sand into glass and stone into liquid. The hunters' confidence evaporated in an instant. They'd thought they were capturing an old wounded drake hiding in the desert. They'd awakened something ancient and furious. Something primal. They'd hurt his child. And now they would learn why galaxies once feared the flame drakes. Vex's mechanical eye registered temperatures that shouldn't be possible. He raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking. For the first time in decades, the galaxy's greatest hunter felt true, bone-deep terror. And Varanther was just getting started. Part 5. The Dragon's Wrath and the Girl's Legacy. Varanther's flames turned the cavern into an inferno. The first 3 hunters didn't even have time to scream. Their high-tech armor, designed to withstand plasma weapons, melted like candle wax. The others broke formation and ran, all their training forgotten in the face of pure primal terror. But there was nowhere to run from a dragon's fury. Commander Vex emptied his weapon into Varanther's chest. The energy bolts splashed harmlessly off scales heated to temperatures that could melt steel. Varanther's massive claw caught Vex around the waist, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. "You hurt my daughter," Varanther said, and his mental voice was like mountains breaking apart. Every hunter still alive heard those words echo in their skulls. "She's just a human," Vex choked out, his mechanical parts sparking and failing in the heat. "She's nothing. She is everything." Varanther's jaws closed and Vex was gone. The surviving hunters fled toward their ship. Varanther pursued, his massive body smashing through stone like it was paper. He burst from the cave into the bright desert sun, his wings spreading wide and blocking out the light. The Krell ship was already firing up its engines for emergency departure, but Varanther's flames washed over them, melting through military-grade hull plating like butter. The ship listed, crashed into a dune and exploded. A few hunters escaped the wreckage and ran into the desert on foot. Varanther let them go. The wasteland would kill them slowly, and right now only one thing mattered. He raced back to the cavern, his heart thundering in his chest. Katie lay where she'd fallen, her breathing shallow and ragged, blood soaking into the dust beneath her. The wound was catastrophic. The drill had gone clean through her small body. Katie. Katie, stay with me. Varanther gathered her carefully in his claws, his massive head pressing gently against her forehead. Little one, please. You cannot leave me. Not you. Not after everything. Katie's eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain and shock. Did I save you? You foolish, brave, wonderful child. Tears ran down Varanther's scaled face, actual tears that he hadn't shed in 3 centuries. Yes, you saved me. But the cost. Worth it, Katie whispered, her voice barely audible. You're my family. That's what family does. Varanther made a decision that broke every law of his ancient species. The Fireheart was sacred, its energy meant only for Drake kind. Sharing it was forbidden, dangerous, possibly fatal to both parties. Dragons who'd tried it in the past had died and their partners had died with them. But watching Katie's life slip away, he found he didn't care about ancient laws or warnings from the past. Forgive me, little one. This will hurt. He placed one claw over her wound and the other over his own chest, above his Fireheart. Then he released a stream of pure energy, not flame but raw life force. Golden light flowed from his heart into Katie's body, seeking out her damaged organs, her failing systems, her fading consciousness. Katie's back arched as power beyond anything humans were meant to contain flooded through her veins. She screamed and the sound bounced off the cavern walls. Varanther nearly stopped, the pain in her voice like knives in his heart, but he forced himself to continue. The alternative was losing her forever. The energy wrapped around Katie's heart like a second pulse. Her wound began to close, flesh knitting together faster than should be possible. Where Varanther's claw touched her chest, a mark appeared, glowing with inner fire. The symbol looked like a stylized flame, burning bright gold against her skin. Katie's eyes snapped open and for just a moment, they blazed the same color as Varanther's. Then the light faded and she gasped, drawing in a huge breath like she'd been drowning. What did you do? She asked, her voice hoarse. I bound us together. Shared my Fireheart's essence with you. Varanther sagged with exhaustion, centuries of age suddenly weighing on him. Our lives are connected now, Katie. You will heal faster than other humans. Temperature extremes won't harm you. We will always be able to sense each other no matter the distance. But I do not know what other changes may come. I'm sorry. I could not watch you die. Katie sat up slowly, touching the flame mark on her chest. She could feel warmth pulsing beneath it, like a second heartbeat keeping time with her own. Then she threw her small arms around Varanther's neck, hugging him as tightly as she could. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for choosing me. For making me family. They stayed like that for a long time, dragon and daughter, bound by fire and love. News of what happened spread across the sector faster than light speed. The Krell ship's emergency beacon had activated during the crash, broadcasting everything. Footage of a 6-year-old child sacrificing herself for a dragon, and that dragon's devastating response, reached every civilized world within days. Colony Theta 7's administrators suddenly found themselves under investigation. Galactic authorities wanted answers about why they'd exiled an innocent child to die in the desert. The colony leaders who'd pushed Katie through that airlock were arrested and faced trial. A representative from the Galactic Council, a stern woman named Helen Torres, arrived at the Wasteland with a diplomatic team. She found Katie and Varanther waiting outside the cave entrance. We've come to make things right, Torres said carefully, very aware of the dragon's power. Katie Reynolds, you've been cleared of all charges. The colony has offered to take you back, provide education, medical care, compensation for what they did. No, Katie said simply. Torres blinked. I'm sorry? I'm not going back there. This is my home now. Varanther is my family. Katie looked up at the dragon, and he gently touched her shoulder with his snout. We're staying here. But child, you need schooling, proper medical attention, other children to play with. I have everything I need, Katie interrupted firmly. But if the council really wants to help, leave us alone. Make this sector restricted. Nobody comes near without our permission. Torres looked between the determined child and the ancient dragon, watching her with predatory intensity. She sighed. I'll make it happen. Though something tells me you two are going to attract attention whether you want it or not. She was right. Within months, stories spread about the dragon's sanctuary. Refugees started finding their way to the wasteland. Species fleeing persecution. Families running from war. Children abandoned by their colonies just like Katie had been. Katie and Varanther turned no one away as long as they came in peace. The settlement grew. Ancient ruins were converted into homes. Gardens flourished using precursor technology from the archives. Katie learned diplomacy from a dozen different species. A former soldier named Jack, who deserted the Krell military after seeing their cruelty, taught her combat skills. A healer named Beth, who'd lost her own family, taught her medicine. By the time Katie turned 16, over 200 beings called the sanctuary home. She'd grown tall and strong, the flame mark on her chest a constant reminder of the bond she shared with Varanther. Sometimes when she was angry or scared, her eyes still flashed gold. She could walk through desert heat that would kill normal humans, and wounds that should have been fatal healed in days instead of months. One evening, Katie stood on the same cliff where she'd first spotted the Krell ship all those years ago. Varanther landed beside her, his scales now showing streaks of silver. Even dragons aged, though slowly. "Do you ever regret it?" Katie asked quietly. "Saving me? Binding us together?" Varanther looked down at the sanctuary, at the lights and laughter and life that had bloomed in the killing wastes. "I was alone and waiting to die, Katie. You gave me purpose again. Family again. Look at what we have built together." "A home," Katie said softly. "Yes. A home for the lost, the abandoned, the hunted. You were thrown away as worthless, and you became the most valuable thing in my long life." He lowered his head against her shoulder. "No regrets, daughter. Only gratitude." Katie smiled, resting her hand on his scaled cheek. Below them, the sanctuary thrived. Children of a dozen species played together in the twilight. Families gathered for evening meals. Guards patrolled peacefully, protecting rather than conquering. The girl they'd abandoned in the wasteland had become the dragon's ward. Together, they'd created something beautiful from exile and loneliness. Proof that even in the harshest places, hope could take root and grow. Proof that the strongest bonds weren't made of blood or species, but of choice and love. In the distance, the twin moons rose over the scorched barrens. Their light reflected off crimson and gold scales, and on the face of a young woman who'd learned the galaxy's most important lesson. That family isn't given. It's chosen. And sometimes salvation comes on wings of fire.